We'll collect a few questions, and then I will channel them to our panelists.
This is on. This is, I guess, primarily for Britt and Dan and Brad, if you want, but really for anyone to answer. So we saw both from the Global Giving example and from the UNICEF Uganda example that it seems like, at least to get these projects started, incentives do help in providing feedback, whether it's incentive for a scribe to collect the stories or an incentive for someone to report, whether they might win something in a lottery. How do you see this then in scalability terms? How do we get from this to something that's like a YouTube, like a Yelp, like a Facebook, where people then voluntarily are committing this information? And if we don't see that step, then what do we see for the continuation of these projects on a grand scale? Thanks.
Great. Go ahead.
Hi. My name's Andrew Carlin. I'm with Population Council. And I'm interested in the feedback loop and the accountability back at the community level. And the example we just saw, there was an effect of, it seems, of knowing others are reporting in the community as well. But the issue around whether or not the information you're getting is correct or is it comes from a particular perspective that can be confirmed in a horizontal way. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about, what those incremental intrinsic incentives around validation that can be pushed out. I know that's been a huge challenge in Ushahidi is the validation process is really difficult. So, for instance, there's work around reporting on an event from that location, and you can get location data from the cell tower if you're connected to the telecoms, they'll give you that. And you can report on something because you're close to it or in temporal proximity to it, and that's a way of validating. So are there ways we can push that validation down the pipe to manage this process a bit better?
Maybe one or two more. We'll go here and then...
Hi, I'm Milad Purnik from the University of Texas. Thank you all. I just wanted to say I appreciate your efforts to get more local involvement, but this is mostly, it seems that the implementation, for example, the World Bank representative, you implement and then you want feedback on the projects. But what's being done to get proper involvement in actually developing the projects that are implemented in the first place? I would love to hear your thoughts on that with regard to climate change. Thank you very much.
I'm Judy Ayala, and I enjoy very much all the presentations. It's great information. My question is mostly for Shanta. Shanta, you mentioned about the doctors and how the electoral process and this data might affect or might have some weight. I would like to hear more about how we can present the data to the people that are precisely can influence the election process. I think that the technology has been great in other countries to really create some wonderful movement. So I would like to hear your thoughts about how it can be possible in other countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is very simple. This is Niran Saraf. I'm just interested to learn the feedback that you're getting, especially the stories and the narratives, were they in English or the local language, and was something lost during the translation? And if it were in the native language, the local language, and then translated to English for the organizations, do you feel something was lost during the translation? Thank you.
Maybe I'll take a crack at the first question, and then we'll go down the line. So the first question, I believe, had to do with how do we sort of make this repairing of the broken feedback loop sustainable, and how do we scale it up? I think my personal view on this, and I'll open this up for others to weigh in, is that we need to go out and do more tests, more RCTs to figure this out. So, one idea that we're thinking about right now is, imagine a world in which the beneficiary feedback that we've discussed is fed into this enhanced project view. So it goes to the right-hand side of your screen. Well, you can imagine a situation in which we automated an email notification to the project manager responsible for that particular project, right? And you could randomly assign that email notification treatment to donor agency staff, right? So beneficiary feedback could go up, imagine 100 projects, and for 50 projects, the project manager at the World Bank gets an email with a copy to his or her supervisor saying, you've received feedback from your beneficiary, and it's now posted online for the world to see. That's one hypothesis, that there may be some internal pressures within donor organizations to sort of spur a meaningful dialogue between donor agency staff and their intended beneficiaries. But I think this is, the wild, wild west. There are many hypotheses that we should be testing. So does anyone want to jump in on that question before I turn it over to Dan on incremental intrinsic incentives for validation? Yeah, John. Oh, sorry. How about Britt and then John?
I can talk about how we're doing it at Global Giving. We can't be in every country and collecting these stories. We have tried, as I mentioned, to make the story system as open as possible so that our partners can actually pick this up and collect stories on their own. So we already are getting interest from a lot of our partners who are starting to collect stories in Haiti and in Tanzania, and we've had interest from others. And they're able to enter in our database, which sort of feeds into the larger system. So if anyone here would like to be part of collecting stories in wherever your projects are, we're happy to talk and sort of give you the information. We've built a 50-page manual on how to do this, which is up on our site and available for anyone. So in the actual immediate sort of logistical way that we can do this now, that's sort of how we're looking at it. On a broader way, we're building in incentives within our own structure with our partners to incentivize them to collect beneficiary feedback and feedback from their communities and rewarding them for doing so.
It's not quite related to my work right now, but within Ushahidi, there's been several projects that were started by activists, by volunteers, to solve a specific problem to the point where it's scaled, and they handed that off to the institutions that are already in place to solve that problem. So then it becomes a value proposition to the organization. For instance, in Kenya, there's a project called Huduma, where the local government who's in place to solve civil society problems around education, distribution of books, fixing potholes, that sort of thing. This platform allows citizens who are reporting information about those problems to then put pressure on the local government to solve that problem, right? And that platform itself has now become a partnership with the government, who actually wants to be involved, and they want a better way to communicate with the public. And so it took a lot of work out of doing this for them. So I think finding those touch points with the organizations that already exist to solve the problem and giving them the tools and delivering them an entire working system, because the pain point for them is they don't always understand the technology, and certainly not the the intrinsic and extrinsic values of getting the public to participate. They certainly can't pay the public to participate, but the other psychology that goes into it, they, I think, are intimidated by.
Well, just quickly on this ISR and the validation work. One of the things we do is to involve the task team leader whose project is being monitored to be part of this process. So when the feedback comes, the task team leader already knows what the beneficiaries are saying and incorporates that information within the ISR that they're doing. Now we are working closely with our colleagues in the World Bank Institute to try to use all this information technology so this feedback can be reported using mobile phones and other means. And just as you said, and the way this has been framed is to ensure that feedback goes to the task team leader and his manager is notified, so he can just ignore whatever the message. So we're still in the in very early stages. Our colleagues in the World Bank Institute are developing the technology for this.
Great. Dan, do you want to speak to the issue of incentivizing data validation efforts?
Great question. We actually did build in a few of those polls that UNICEF sent out were actually factual information that we had information on, at least from the government, and hopefully that's at least something, right? So we can actually look at the citizen feedback and match it against the government data and see how close it got, and some sort of a verification of that. Presumably, there may be differences among those treatments about who provided the better information. I don't know if that will be the case, but it's a possibility. My guess is that people will do. There just seems to be a lot of hunger. As I've read through these hundreds of messages, they're interested. At least the ones who signed up, right? They're interested in doing something. I think these are, in the pro-social end of the spectrum, they want to make some kind of difference. This is something small they can do. I was surprised at even in these, short Twitter feeds, just how much, sort of thoughtfulness and insight was in many of them. Some of them are just, quick responses, but others of them were thinking about it quite a bit. And I think that's rather interesting and suggests that maybe the information's better than we might have expected. But I'm curious to check.
I'm not quite sure. Maybe Sar, who's the appropriate person to answer this question, or perhaps Shanta. But there was a question about how beneficiary feedback can be used to influence project design. I believe the question was particularly geared towards the bank, but probably towards donor agencies more generally.
We have several ways we're doing this. One is to involve, the people, civil society, non-state actors, and in general the beneficiaries as part of the project preparation process. So, they're part of that whole entire project cycle, even when the discussions on the project we're preparing is not just, the discussion is not just between the bank and the government. We also have discussions with non-state actors and other even institutions, that are there to get a sense of what exactly are we trying to do. If we are sort of trying to do a project in agriculture, it's not just crafting it. We need to understand a whole lot of things, including the political economy dynamics of what's holding back reform in that area. And so that gives us scope to, talk to lots of people. And so you get ideas on how you can design this project going forward. But just also quickly on the question, these projects that I'm talking about are not bank implemented projects. We don't. These are government implemented projects. And essentially, what happens is, the bank team that's supervising the project goes out there and do our regular supervision. But we also need help from, either beneficiaries or non-state actors and people who know about this project, which is why we are trying to find ways of getting that input to ensure that we can be able to make some changes. One quick example, in Zambia, for example, when we did this work in an agricultural project, one of the feedback that came was that, the small grants program that was part of the project, the people who were supposed to benefit from these small grants did not have enough help in preparing the applications to access these grants. So basically, the numbers were low for those that were getting submitting applications for these grants. So that feedback came to the task team, and then they took steps in trying to ensure that help was provided to the people to prepare applications, and then that the numbers went up in terms of those that were submitting applications to access these grants. So these small, they may be small, kinds of feedback we are getting, But the issue here was that the number of people who were benefiting from this project was small, and the task team leader was made aware of that feedback, and corrections were made to ensure that the beneficiaries really, who are the true owners of the project, got the benefit of the project. So that's one example.
Let me just add to what my colleague Sar Kapunde said about the use of beneficiary participation in project design in a somewhat unusual way. What we found is, in a lot of our projects, say take an education project, what the binding constraint is some policy or institutional reform that needs to take place in the education sector that will make a difference whether this project is effective or not, and so something that might change whether teachers are absent and so on. And you find that you can't really get that reform through designing a project better, but you can by building that political consensus in the country. And what we found was that in some countries, an NGO goes out there, a domestic NGO goes out there and surveys and does some surveys of teacher absenteeism and publishes it out there. That then it puts a lot of pressure on the government to reform teacher pay policy or hiring policies and so on. And that indirectly actually makes our project work better. So what we found is that actually using even our project preparation funds, rather than using it to design the flow of funds for the project, we put that money into the NGO and say, go out and do the survey. And when they go out and do the survey and they actually develop the results, and the results are publicized and owned and so on, that actually helps improve the performance of our project. So it's an indirect way of getting the beneficiaries. Let me then answer the question about politics and teachers or absentee doctors and how that works. I mean, it starts from the observation that what seems to drive the world is really the incentives facing politicians. Because you observe that politicians have been elected and reelected in districts with high rates of infant mortality. And they haven't, frankly, they haven't done anything about it. Then suddenly, one day, there's a flood in that district, and there may be a slight increase in infant mortality from a very high base, and then immediately the politicians get into action, and suddenly there are all these campaigns of immunization and everything else. So we said, gee, if we observe it that way, why don't we actually get this information out there by district of the politicians? So we actually measure how much infant mortality there is in each political district, in each constituency, and put it out there, and actually create some benchmark competition. It's sort of interesting that in Uganda, for instance, the teacher absenteeism rates are now available by district, like the ones, you can even go one step further, which we've done, although it's a bit sensitive, shall we say, which is we look at the difference between the amount of public spending on education by district and the effectiveness of that education in terms of school completion rates and so on. And that gap is a measure of sort of the inefficiencies. And you find that those inefficiencies are highest in the districts that voted for Museveni in the last election. It so happens, but you just put that information out there, and you begin to understand what are the dynamics going on. So you can do a lot with this information, which is what all of you guys are collecting, with the perspective in mind that this is actually, if we can figure out a way to have this change the political incentives facing politicians.
Britt, maybe just a very quick response on the lost in translation issue.
So in East Africa, we allowed storytellers to choose between Swahili and English. Almost all of them, I don't know the exact percentage, but something like 99% chose to tell their stories in English because it was written, and most of the scribes had been trained in writing in English and not in Swahili. For Haiti, which we're doing now, most of them are coming in Creole. All stories that are translated are tagged as translated, and when we do analysis, we put less weight on the words themselves versus the concepts and tagging of the stories.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we're running over time. I just want to thank the audience for their patience. I hope you'll join me in thanking the panelists for what I think was a very thought-provoking discussion.